Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us here on Go Local Live in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm pleased to say hello and welcome to Craig Floyd. He's the president and CEO of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. Craig, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Molly. Great to be with you.
We're pleased to have you. So today, the nonprofit organization, the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, just released some data. I was looking over it today. The preliminary report shows that 128 law enforcement officer fatalities happened in 2017, and that's nationwide. And that number is down from last year. You just released this report today. Tell us a little bit about your findings.
Well, it's a good news, bad news story. You've mentioned the bad news, of course. 128 law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty during 2017. A bit of good news, though, in that report and that number is the fact that this is the second lowest fatality figure for a single year in law enforcement since 1959. So that is certainly encouraging. It's the lowest we've seen since 2013. Lost 116 officers that year. And since 2013, we had seen a 3-year spike in officer fatalities. 2016, we had 143 officers killed in the line of duty. This year, that number dropped to 128. That's down 10%, and we can only hope that that trend will continue.
What do you attribute this decrease to?
I think there's a number of factors at work. Let's start with something that I think we're seeing a lot of lately, and that's a lot of public support for law enforcement in this country. Last couple of years have been tough on law enforcement. A lot of criticism, a lot of second guessing, a lot of officers held up as if maybe their conduct wasn't as professional and proper as we'd like to see. Well, it turns out those were isolated instances, snapshots, if you will, and weren't really a true picture of law enforcement in this country.
Oh, give me one moment. Looks like we just lost Craig Floyd. We're going to try to get him back. Give me one moment here. Hi, Craig. Looks like we lost you for a second.
Yep, sorry about that. Got my technical crew in here. Thank you. What should we do?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Good to go?
We good over here? Joe?
Yep.
Okay, we're going to jump right back in. You good, Craig?
Hey.
Okay, I'm introducing Craig Floyd. He is the president and CEO of the National Officer. I'm introducing Craig Floyd, the president and CEO of the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund. So today, Mr. Floyd, your organization released a report that introduced that the number of fatalities of law enforcement officers went down from last year, which you were talking about. It's good news and bad news, and we were just speaking a moment ago. We were looking for information on what you think that's attributed to.
Well, I think we're seeing a decrease for several reasons. One, better training. Officers are especially getting emphasis on de-escalation training. All right, this means how do you take a volatile situation and keep it from becoming violent? How do you calm that individual? A lot of times officers deal with the mentally deranged, for example. Officers are now better trained how to deal with those situations and prevent them from becoming violent. Secondly, I think we're seeing a lot more improved equipment for our officers. That's safety equipment. When you look at bullet-resistant vests, the soft body armor that officers have been wearing now for decades, those vests have become more comfortable, lighter, easier to wear during hot weather, and more officers are wearing bullet-resistant vests. Those vests have saved more than 3,000 law enforcement lives over just the last couple of decades. We're also seeing more officers carrying less lethal weapons. Taser stun guns is a good example. Those stun guns allow officers to keep a safer distance from resisting violent felons. And statistics clearly show that when officers carry these taser stun guns, there are fewer injuries, not just to the officers, but to the criminal suspects that they must interact with and confront. Also, I think there's greater emphasis on promoting officer safety and wellness than ever before by the law enforcement agencies, by groups like ours, the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Fund, in partnership with the Department of Justice, with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. All of us are focusing great energy and resources on what we can do better to make it safer for our officers. And finally, I think there's greater situational awareness. Officers last year realized that many of their colleagues were literally being assassinated by people who had a hatred toward law enforcement, who disrespected the badge. And now we're seeing more and more officers recognizing that every situation they're in at any given moment could be a life-threatening moment. And so there's much more situational awareness. Many officers tell me their heads are on swivels. They're constantly checking their surroundings to make sure there are no risks threatening their lives. Lastly, I would say President Trump is making a good example, and we're seeing a trickle-down effect. He has expressed great support for law enforcement every chance he gets. And that's not only boosted the morale for officers, but I think it's had an effect on the public. The public now is becoming much more vocal in their support for law enforcement. There's always been great respect and support for the men and women in law enforcement, but too often that majority has been silent. Now we're seeing more and more people express their support for law enforcement, and I think ultimately that'll mean greater resources devoted to law enforcement so they can do their jobs not only effectively, but safely.
I find it interesting breaking down, your report does a great job breaking down how law enforcement dies or passes away in the line of duty. And year after year, the cause of fatalities often is car accidents, whether it is a single vehicle fatality or multiple vehicle crash. Talk to me a little bit about that. How do we improve this? How do we make it safer? Is it through better training for our officers? Is it through public awareness? Because we're looking at multiple car crashes on one hand, and then we're also looking at these single vehicle crashes. I'm just looking at the data here on my phone. Is this an issue that we need to improve not only with officers but with the general public as well?
Well, first, let's start with the data, which tells us that over the last 20 years, more officers have been killed in traffic-related incidents than have died by gunfire or any other cause. When you break that down, that includes motorcycle crashes, that includes automobile crashes, that includes officers who were struck I've always concerned about and expressed it to many of the trainers and law enforcement leaders I speak with. Twice much firearms as we do driver training, especially high-speed driver training. The fact of the matter is most law enforcement about weapons are seldom the force. Good thing. Give them tons of so that if that would should be driver training for our officers. At some point in their career, they're going to be driving at high speeds to respond to an emergency or chase a fleeing felon, and they're going to put themselves at great risk. We need to better train our officers when it comes to high-speed driver training and dealing with the dangerous conditions they often have to face on the roadway. They're out there driving during the worst of conditions, slick roads, icy roads, snow-covered roads, heavy rain. They don't have the convenience of staying inside in those situations. That's their job. So we need to train them better, and I think we're starting to see that. more and more. 47 officers this year died in traffic-related incidents, and that was a 13% decrease from last year. So we've seen some major improvements in the area of traffic safety for our officers. More officers using seatbelts, more officers driving slower, not allowing themselves to be distracted by all the technology that we're putting in their cars. This is a real problem. You know, we're always talking about distracted driving for the public. But meanwhile, we're giving our officers radios and laptop computers and license plate readers and radar to check the speed of the driving public. And then we expect them not to be distracted. I think that's a big challenge, something that we need to focus on more and more.
Well, Craig Floyd, thank you so much with the Memorial Fund. We're going to put a link to our website to the preliminary report, as well as more information on the organization, nonprofit organization, so people can find more information not only on the report, but on your organization as well, if they want more information. So we appreciate you joining us today. It's fascinating information and a look at the breakdown on all of this and the trends that we've seen over the years. So we do really appreciate you joining us today via Skype. Everyone, please hang tight as we get set up for our next guest here on Go Local.